Hi! This time I'm going to talk about what I consider to be the fastest and easiest way to run and understand a complex campaign setting in tabletop role-playing games. Some campaign settings can feel quite overwhelming, especially historical and pseudo-historical campaign settings. It's just that there are so many logical things within them. Even within the fictional context, you have so many things related to kingdoms, nations, planets in case of a science fantasy or science fiction setting. There are also trade routes, political issues, cultural details. There are just so many things. This is very different from more loose settings that count on improvisation and just hand waving some things that are not really necessary to have a fun and somewhat coherent experience, despite some contradictions and ambiguities related to the rest of the game world. And I have also played those loose settings. It's somewhat of a relief or respite every now and then that you're just running the game, improvising everything, and when something doesn't make sense with some aspect of the game world, you just fix things immediately, retcon some things even, and you keep on playing. But there's also a great enjoyment in keeping an overall permeating coherency or consistency throughout the entire campaign. When things just make sense with everything, when things click or fit into a sort of space as if it were all just a huge puzzle, it just feels so real and immersive. It really pulls you into the experience. So I think it's worth the trouble if you're looking for those sorts of moments when you suddenly forget that you are playing in a fictional world, in a fictional setting, and you are thinking of the non-player characters, the different situations, the places, as if they were actually real and directly connected, or sometimes indirectly connected, to the events of the adventure. So it all depends on your taste of what you like of your RPG sessions. So this video is going to give you some tips. It may serve as a sort of starter guide. Maybe it's going to be quite useful for beginners or for those people that have just started to play role-playing games. And in case you have been running role-playing games for a while, maybe it will offer some different ways on taking on campaign settings. So when it comes to complex campaign settings, it's important to be aware that everything is very solidly connected. So things that sometimes do not make sense or represent some contradictions, they may have a sort of ripple effect over the rest of the setting. If some particular area is affected by some sort of law or even some natural phenomena, and you ignore that, things could be, the immersion could fall apart. In other occasions, you really want to know more details about a person, a place, about some sort of object, and if you do not have your information in order or organized, that is, as a game master, as a referee, if your players start to ask more details and you try to improvise or change things, when they actually get to the area where the information is right there, quite present, very easy to grasp, then they could feel a bit disappointed because you just contradicted yourself. It is possible for you to modify the thing that you just made up, but because it is such a complex setting, this is especially important for those settings with a long history of important changes and wars and the transformation and modification of different laws within the setting. Things just start to fall apart as you try to cover up your mistakes Sometimes you realize that you said, oh, well, that's how things work in this kingdom. But the real way in which, on how things proceed in that kingdom is also connected to some relations or interactions with that kingdom, with another kingdom. And perhaps it's related to some sort of export and import sort of deal or situation or agreement, or maybe it's related to war. So as you try to cover up everything that you are constantly improvising or modifying things, things just start to pile up more and more. It's a sort of domino effect. So it's much better to keep some, like I said, coherency, consistency. So this is where complex settings can feel like they are too much, like they're just so deep and so complex. So how do you manage to learn everything? You do not need to be a walking encyclopedia of a particular setting, but you need to have a solid grasp on how things connect with each other, the people, the places, everything. So instead of just trying to memorize all of the book, or trying to be an expert at opening the book of the setting in the right page when the players ask some details, or are just curious about the setting in general, I'm here to offer some advice on how to handle things a bit more smoothly. The key lies in adventure modules. Adventure modules that you purchase or those that you create yourself, because they represent a sort of key to learn more about the setting, the important and necessary parts in a particular adventure or campaign, without having to learn everything, without having to overexert yourself with information. Let's start with the option of purchasing an adventure module. Let's say that you purchase your module and you start to read through it. It is recommended, of course, that you read through the entire thing and understand how the adventure is going to proceed. And now start to divide or categorize, different elements from that module. Non-player characters, different adventure sites, adventure hubs such as cities and towns. Now start to think what the players are going to do in those places with those objects, how they are going to interact with the non-player characters, and all of the different questions that they could ask about a site, the non-player characters, and the objects related to the rest of the campaign world. So if they find some objects in an adventure site, maybe they are exploring some ruins or attacking an enemy keep or fortress, and they find some unusual magical weapons, they are probably going to ask if those weapons were stolen, where the enemies obtained those items or objects, and you need to think ahead of time where those weapons come from. Sometimes the module tells you, other times you need to come up with the answer yourself, and because you are planning things ahead, analyzing that module as a sort of key or portal to understand the rest of the setting, then it's easy for you to connect them to some neighboring kingdom or to a city or town nearby. Maybe those weapons were stolen by that group of, let's say, hobgoblins that took control over the keep. So now, because players are quite curious, maybe they want to see if there is some sort of reward for recovering these weapons. They decide to go to that city, to that town, to that other kingdom, and ask about if someone got robbed and they ended up losing this cargo of weapons in the process. Or maybe they are just curious about the place. So you need to think ahead. Always have like 2 or 3 threads connected to each element of the module. Read a bit of that place or that object or that non-player character that is connected to the non-player characters, objects, and sites of that adventure module. It sounds more difficult than it actually is. Or what if the player characters start to talk with non-player characters in city or town, and they find out that that character comes from another place, another area, Many adventure modules have complex non-player characters with a backstory that, oh, that non-player character was born in this other principality, but he's currently here because of this or that. Read about that place where the character comes from, or where that character has some family, because maybe the player characters want to visit that place. What if the player characters want to know more about the lore, the legends, and backgrounds of the town, the city, the dungeon, the oubliette, the mines that they just investigated? You're going to need knowledge about those legends. So as you read through the purchased adventure module, you need to ask yourself questions constantly. Imagine that you are moving through the adventure and just ask questions related to the non-player characters, the sites, and the objects that the player characters are going to encounter. So basically, it's as if you are learning about the campaign setting from the inside of the adventure module to the outside, as everything connects with the game world. And that's how you become quite knowledgeable about the deities of the setting, if it has deities, the different ruling figures, the threats, the monsters. It's also useful to familiarize yourself with major hazards and events that could serve to stall or redirect the player characters towards certain areas. Maybe the player characters were hired by a local baron to investigate an abandoned academy of wizards. The baron gave them an entire week to find out what is going on there, because there are rumors that there are lights and strange sounds during the night in the abandoned academy. So the player characters have 1 week to identify the cause, because in 1 week the baron is going to decide if he's going to reopen the academy or if he is going to do something else with it, perhaps repurpose it. He doesn't want to waste time, so the player characters just have 1 week. The player characters go into the academy, and as they start to explore the different rooms, they find this strange medallion with some very weird symbols, some glyphs. They do not recognize the glyphs or symbols, or perhaps one of the characters is quite knowledgeable in that, perhaps a bard. You make your roll and you know that those symbols are connected to a particular some ruins nearby, or a city, or it could be any place. And normally the adventure module tells you something that, oh, this medallion connects to the next part. If you want to continue this adventure, you could use the medallion as an excuse to visit other sites. But then the players decide that they don't want to wait until they finish exploring the academy. They want to go to that place right now, to the place connected to the medallion, and that place is somewhat far away, but not too much. And they think, well, we just started to explore this academy. We still have, let's say, 6 or 5 days to keep on exploring and determine the cause of the strange lights and sounds. So now, if you haven't done some research ahead of time, you are in a bit of problems. Sorry, in a bit of trouble. So here is where you use those natural hazards and some other events that happen in the surrounding area. So maybe you took your book detailing the setting, and there are bandits moving about certain roads, those roads that the player characters will have to move across. Maybe there is some sort of science fantasy hazard of sorts. Maybe there is a storm of nanomachines that starts to devour everything as it moves through certain areas. Maybe it's something more natural, like a group of giant vermin that move from area to area every now and then according to the season, and they're also going to be moving across the path that the player characters are going to take to reach that site related or connected to the medallion. Maybe there is war between two nations, and the battlefield is basically the middle of the path or the zone that the player characters can take to reach that other place. Now, two things could happen here. One, the player characters could go into that hazardous area and they could get attacked by the vermin that I mentioned, or They could have to escape from the nanomachine storm, or maybe they are in the middle of the battlefield. Maybe they feel that it's just too risky. They decide to go back to keep on exploring the academy. But if they decide to keep on pushing, to keep on moving forward, then this is a great excuse for you to improvise many encounters and adventures. You have a lot of freedom to do so, because as long as you don't modify some important thing related to a city, a site, some town, some important feature of the zone, of the campaign setting, you can insert all sorts of towers, haunted swamps, cursed forests, anything that you can think of, as long as it makes sense geographically with the area the characters are moving through, and you can start to improvise things. You're doing this basically to reward the player characters for their initiative of exploring the game world. You can use all of those elements that perhaps you remember because when you skimmed or read through certain sections of the campaign setting book. But like I said, the purpose is just stalling the player characters, making some time while you are perhaps remembering or referencing some things of the place that the characters want to go to. Or maybe you have so many adventures and rather like side quests or encounters as the player characters are moving from the academy to that other place connected to the medallion, that time is up. Your 3 or 4 hours to play during that day, time is up. You will have to keep on playing the next day or whenever it is possible, and by that day you will have the chance to read through the section in the campaign book covering that city or that temple or ruins that have to do with the medallion. So that's the way that you still keep some sense of coherency or logic with the setting. You're improvising things as long as they do not affect important aspects or elements of the game world. Now this works in the another way around. If you don't want to purchase adventure modules, you decide to design your own adventures. In this case, instead of working from inside out, that is from inside the adventure module towards the rest of the campaign world, you're going to work from the campaign world towards a center, towards the center of the adventure that you are designing. So you basically take your campaign setting book and you choose an area or zone in the map that you want to base your adventure. Maybe you like scary adventures. Look for that area in your campaign setting that looks kind of like Fantasy Transylvania. Or maybe you like adventures related to intrigue, diplomacy, lots of social interaction. Look for those huge cities or like a metropolis, and that's going to be the center of your adventure. Now, create or imagine a sort of perimeter around that central focus, that point. So let's say that you chose a city. Look to the surrounding areas and start to pick things randomly, like this king over here, this abandoned house over there. Start to read about the history of the abandoned house, the personal history of the king or any other character that you decide to choose that is living in the perimeter of that zone. Let's say a witch, or maybe there is a questing knight that is moving around the area, and start to come up with some indirect ways in which those characters and places are related to the city that is going to be the center of your adventure. So maybe the king is actually the relative of someone living within that city. Maybe the abandoned house is the former home of a non-player character that lives within the city. Maybe the witch is looking for some sort of spell that can only be found in the hidden library of that city, and so forth. The important thing is to make connections with the outside world, with the rest of the campaign world, so that you start to zoom in an imaginary way start to advance, to close the perimeter, the circle, towards the center of your adventure, as you start to make connections with different hamlets and towns and cities and dungeons and grottos, mountains, anything related to the area that you decided to choose for your adventure. Eventually all of that will connect with the center of your adventure. So by that moment, you know that you can take on any sort of question or action that the player characters decide to do. Taking that into consideration, I truly recommend that the perimeter or circle that you are going to be forming or shaping around the center of your adventure should be quite wide, because that way you can take on so many things that the player characters may decide to do without having to learn everything about the setting in just one go. Unless you want to include some portals or teleporting devices, find out how those devices or portals connect to perhaps other places within the setting, to other planes of existence, to other planets perhaps. If it's a science fantasy, science fiction game, you really need to make some research, do some research on how certain vehicles could take the characters from that place to another planet. In that case, your circle, your perimeter is going to have to expand a bit more in a 3D way, because now the player characters are not only going to be able to move in that particular zone within the planet, maybe they're going to other planets, other dimensions, other planes. Like I said, it looks difficult, but it is actually not. And if they just start to, in those cases where there's access to devices and portals and vehicles, keep in mind what I told you about the hazards, the events. Oh, they want to use that vehicle to go to that other planet, and you know nothing about that planet. They are going to use some sort of rocket ship, and you have no idea about anything at all. You don't know about the ruling class in that planet, anything related to the culture. You know nothing. So now you need to come up with something that, oh well, there is a way for you to obtain that vehicle, that rocket ship, but the only rocket ship available is in need of repair, and the pieces cannot be found in the city. You need to look for them, and now you start to improvise the ways in which the characters can repair that vehicle, so that by the end of the session, maybe they achieved their objective, but the journey to that planet is going to happen in the next session, the next day, or whenever you can play it. And by then, you need to do your homework and read about that planet, the necessary things at least. Or maybe, like I said, maybe there are portals. Maybe those portals are malfunctioning. So the player character is going to the portal and they end up in a place that you actually know about. You actually have information about that other place, and it is only when the player characters accomplish something within that place that you know about, it is then that they can return to the portal. Maybe they need to write some sort of inscription, or just like apply some sort of magical glyph, some sort of rune, so that the portal takes them to the other place that they want to go. So that way you are not negating or stopping the characters from doing what they want to do, but you are asking some requirements for them and giving them excuse to adventure further into the setting, and reward them with experience points depending on the setting, or treasure, anything, magical items, etc. And like I said, it looks a bit complex, but that's the way I have learned many different campaign settings throughout the years. I just took the campaign setting book and just read through it, just familiarized myself with some things related to deities, monsters, some important non-player characters, and then I took my module and let's say I purchased the module and I started to read through it, and I asked myself, the player characters will probably want to visit that place, and I read a bit about that place. So, the player characters are probably going to talk with that non-player character, and maybe they, through that non-player character, they will get to talk to this other non-player character. So I started to read about the background of that non-player character, and before you know it, you already have a good grasp on a large chunk of the setting. Or like I said in the other case, I start to design my adventures, moving from the outside to the center of the adventure, like, oh well, I'm going to base this in this town over here. Oh, sorry, in the surrounding area we have some forests. What if those forests are places that the characters from that village, the non-player characters from that village, go to the forest to hunt or to get some wood. That's a great idea for side quests. So now I know that the player characters may end up visiting this forest. Or, oh, in that other area in the northwest, there is this abandoned tower. Maybe there are rumors and legends about the tower in town. Okay, so now I need to learn more about this town. In the campaign setting book, I read about the tower. I see that there are some enemies, some hidden caches and all of that. Maybe there are ghosts. And now I am ready if the player characters attempt something. And as I start to learn about the surrounding area, the surrounding elements, sites, people, then I focus on the main adventure, on the main storyline, at least within that screenshot of the game world. And if the player characters ask questions or decide to go someplace of the related to the surrounding areas, I am already prepared because I use that as my starting point. Well, I hope I managed to communicate this information successfully. Like I said, it's a bit more complex. Maybe some of my ideas related to this process of learning about the complex campaign settings did not go as direct or as clear as I wanted them to go. But I still hope you obtain some ideas on how to take on different complex campaign settings. Well, thanks for watching this video. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending Drive-Thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you and see you later.